Chairman, it's a pleasure to serve under you, and I want to start off also by congratulating the Honourable Gentleman for Bolton West in securing this debate. Our nurseries, as we've already heard, play a vital role in children's development and preparing them for their future education and careers, and if we get it right, a very important role in promoting social mobility and alleviating poverty, and improving standards should be a central part of that, along with ensuring that they're properly resourced. Since the government introduced the new early years funding formula and the 30 years free childcare policy in 2017, 121 nurseries in England have closed, which is a 66% increase in closures from the previous year. This is a very worrying figure when we know that the government's intention is from the commitments of 30 hours and so on, is not to see a decline in nursery provision. So that's what's happening. And of the nurseries that have closed since the policy was introduced, 71% received an hourly funding rate of less than £5 per child per hour. A total of 44% received the lowest funding rate, lower funding rate of £4.30 per child per hour. And these recent closures are affecting thousands of families. And I believe, to be charitable to the government, it is an unintended consequence of a well-intentioned but flawed policy. Although I welcome the 30 hours free childcare scheme for working families, the range and complexity and the fragmentation that's already been mentioned has made take-up less than desirable. Some of the things that have been introduced, the 15 free hours for disadvantaged 2-year-olds, the 30 free hours for 3- and 4-year-old children of working parents, the tax-free childcare scheme, and then the closure, in parallel, the closure of new entrants for the childcare voucher schemes, while not doing an assessment to see what the impact would be on those who have benefited and others who could benefit from it, despite requests from the Treasury Select Committee that I serve on. And although the time was extended, there's still a lot further to go in looking at how childcare vouchers could be used to continue supporting families where that has worked well. The funding situation is underlined by the wider concern that's already been mentioned around passing on the requirement to increase the wage level, the national minimum wage, pension contributions, business rates, and yet the government hasn't faced up to the fact that these nurseries can't afford to pay for it without national government support, nor can local authorities step in any longer, again because of the context of funding cuts, unprecedented funding cuts over many years to local authority budgets. And the wider context is that in constituencies like mine, where schools have worked in partnership with nurseries to co-finance and support them, that is no longer an option because the school system is facing still, despite some of the changes after the general election, some £2 billion worth of cuts under the so-called fair funding formula, which is nothing short of a disgrace and certainly not fair to constituents like mine, where we see a massive cut in school funding. So those are no longer options, which have been a huge help in protecting nurseries in constituencies like mine. The number of free places for disadvantaged 2-year-olds and children with special education needs and disabilities, something I know that the Minister cares deeply about given his brief, is falling, because they are more expensive to care for due to the higher staff and child ratios. And I don't believe that the government has taken that on board, because if it did, it would recognise the important contribution that nurseries that work with SEND children make in our constituencies. 2-year-olds are not currently eligible for support from the Disability Access Fund, Early Years Pupil Premium or the SEN Inclusion Fund, all of which could be used to improve their access to early years provision. After campaigns and petitions, one of the petitions that had received over 10,000 signatures, the government committed to in 2017, in the 2017 early years national funding formula, to continue the level of funding of maintained nursery schools until 2019-20 through a block of a supplementary grant of 59 million per year. But there are no guarantees that this is going to continue after 2020. And our maintained nurseries are left unable to plan, and in some cases, as you'll hear shortly, are facing closure. It would represent a 31% funding cut if there is no continuity of funding. So I hope the Minister today will be able to say what he's going to do post-2020 and whether he's doing extensive lobbying of the Chancellor ahead of his statement to try and address this major problem. Because the specialist support that is provided to maintained nurseries is vital if we want to address the specific needs of children that desperately need that provision. Maintained nurseries are vital services. And as I've said, they completely transform lives, and I've seen that visiting nurseries, meeting children, meeting parents across my constituency, meeting outstanding professionals working really hard with very little remuneration because they believe in our children, they believe in giving them a good future. 64% of maintained nursery schools are in the 30 most deprived areas of England, and because of the quality of education they offer, 63% are graded outstanding by Ofsted. So when government ministers talk about cost savings, they need to not use such blunt instruments that don't take into account the way in which professionals, families have worked to improve achievement from a very early age, which creates the building blocks to success in later life. The admissions policies prioritise the children in the greatest need in those nurseries. They provide a high number of places for disadvantaged children, as I've said, who are SEND children, particularly children with the most complex needs. These children make great progress through the education system that they just wouldn't do otherwise. The average number of available childcare places in areas of disadvantage has fallen by 33 per 100 children in 2016 to just 25 in 2018. So there's a trend that's worrying, which I believe the government needs to reverse. And across the UK, there are now over 500 fewer Sure Start centres than there were in 2010. So the wider support structure has also crumbled at a time where families are facing huge amounts of pressure, huge amounts of uncertainty and insecurity. So this is one of the areas of vital provision that they need protected. And in my constituency, the child poverty rate is the highest in the country, and yet our education system has been transformed over the last 20 years, and early years and maintained nurseries have played a critical role in that. But and we've also faced funding cuts of 24% from 2010 to 2020, and the local authority is going to have to make a further £58 million worth of savings because of the national government cuts. So in that context, it has been unfortunately the case that they no longer can co-finance and meet the shortfall of a number of nurseries, maintained nurseries in my constituency. And I'm deeply concerned about that because 3 out of 6 were announced to be closed this September, and we simply cannot afford for that to happen. But the local authority just doesn't have the bandwidth anymore to be able to continue to finance them. Nurseries like Overland, Mary Sambrook, John Smith have made huge differences to children's lives. The Overland Children's Centre, for example, providing specialist care services for deaf children. And parents are extremely anxious about what's going to happen in the future, and particularly concerned about other children who could have benefited from these nurseries that are no longer going to be able to. So I hope that the Minister will heed the warnings of a cross-party group of members of Parliament, over 70, who, including some 12 from his own party, who called on the government to think again about the funding that is available for this very important service. And also the Treasury Select Committee's report recommendations, which highlighted the importance of the government making sure that the costs that are being passed on because of the national minimum wage and the pension contributions and business rates are borne by national government. Otherwise, nurseries won't have much option but to either charge, which some of them have started to do, and then it's no longer, I mean, it makes a mockery of the policy of 30 hours free childcare or 15 hours free childcare. And also, in some cases, as he is aware, closure. The committee also called on the government to ensure that the take-up, to look closely at why take-up is so low. 90% at the time when we were looking at it, lower than initially expected. And also we highlighted the importance of making sure that those in particular need, those with disadvantage, are targeted, because the new arrangements don't seem to be reaching those communities, those families. And that the cutting back of higher quality staff and changing the services that were previously free may undermine the government's overarching policy objectives to support those who face disadvantage, who live in disadvantaged areas. And that certainly includes constituencies like mine and the constituencies of many members of Parliament. So I hope the Minister will redouble his efforts to persuade the Chancellor to do more to finance this very important sector that is vital for the future of our children and the future of our country. Thank you.
Tracy Brabin.
Thank you so much for calling me in this